Hi, my name's Jennifer Knight. I did my research on narrative theory. I'm going to share a brief overview of narrative theory with you today. Narrative therapists are collaborators or consultants. They are not directive like other therapy approaches that we have learned in class. They are rooted in social constructivist philosophy. So they don't use assessments very much in sessions. They don't apply diagnoses very often in sessions, and they utilize a free form association of communication so that people can tell their life stories to the therapist without there being any kind of structure or instructions to follow. And so then it's more organic for the client. Life goals are achieved through the scaffolding technique. This was developed by Vygotsky, and it is a technique in which people learn a skill and they build upon that skill and learn more skills from others and their peripheral. And this is how we improve and get better with experience. Narrative therapists are committed to grounding individual stories in cultural and historical contexts. So, this is really good for culturally diverse individuals. And this theory is informed by feminism, LGBTQ issues, race, cultural analysis, and values of social justice. So, pulling from feminist theory, they also promote the uh, idea the personal is political. They believe that reality is socially created. Reality is created through language and cultures. And they believe the dominant culture's rhetoric determines who gets power, who gets control, and who doesn't. Here's a little bit about how the theory works. Narrative therapists aim to establish rapport with their clients, so it's really important that they establish a relationship with their clients that is strong and trusting. They want to promote new, more satisfying stories for their clients so they can reauthor their narratives that support their preferred outcomes. So they elicit problem stories from the client so they can restructure these stories. And then they will deconstruct the problem stories together, and then they will construct a more preferred narrative that reflects the client's preferred outcomes and goals in life. The NT listens to clients' stories. They are good listeners and they do reply with questioning. Questioning is a technique that they utilize 99% of the time to learn the client's current problems and how it affects their relationships. And NTs help the client externalize the problem and evaluate its effects of making problems in their lives, and also so that the problem is not a part of their identity and it allows them to address the problem as it is a separate entity. The goal of therapy is to deconstruct this problem story and create what the client is aiming for. The client and the therapist together do this, and they examine times when the client has actually been able to resist problems and focus on a new story that can be created from their previous successes. NTs typically avoid formal assessments and diagnosing, as I said previously, and their primary goal is to promote the client in living an enriching story. The key founders of the narrative approach is most commonly associated with Michael White and David Epstein. Together, they created a book, The Narrative Means to a Therapeutic Ends. Michael White published his second book, Maps of Narrative Practice, in 2007. Narrative therapy is a very recent therapeutic approach, firmly situated in the social constructivist approach to psychotherapy. It's unique, it's recent. Also, there's not a lot of research that can be found about it. So, this is definitely an implication for future research. These theorists believe the initiatives of people's lives are identified, characterized, and honored, and taken into the development of storylines. Many individual storylines have been subdued by a dominant problem. The saturated stories of people's lives can initiate personal agency. And this is what these two theorists believe and promote in their theoretical approach. Here I'm going to share with you some key tenets of narrative therapy. The first one I listed is reconceptualization of new experiences, and the theory often uses metaphors. For example, the tree of life. One a therapist might say to a client, "Oh, you've developed and your life is growing and is becoming as strong as one of the sequoias at Yosemite, and it's the tree of life." That might be a poor metaphor, but something like that. The second one I listed for you is the development of individuals occurs in relation to others. And this is drawn from Vykotski's scaffolding that I mentioned earlier. So it's really important to incorporate and realize that we learn from one another and in our environment. And this is very much related to the social constructivist philosophy that our community, our environment, the people around us are essential to our learning experience and development. Number three that I listed is double listening. Narrative therapy challenges negative stories about identity that result from oppression and marginalization. And the way I understand it, narrative therapists propose opposites, such as you can't know happiness if you haven't experienced sadness, or you can't know loneliness if you have experienced connection with others, to try to bridge the gap and understand how to get back to that preferred state that the client wants. They've obviously experienced it, so there must be a way to get back there. Number four I listed is questioning. This explores the influence of a problem in a client's life and in their relationships. And so questioning is used often. This is a frequent technique in narrative therapy. Number five I listed is justifying. Narrative therapy asks the client how he or she or they evaluate the problem, its operations, and how they choose to respond. So, validating the client's views and how they choose to respond to a problem, understanding their motives. And they might not be functional. However, it's important to validate the client and then work from there. The sixth one I listed is uh, narrative therapists often employ outsider witness practice, and they sometimes invite others to participate in therapy conversations with the client receiving therapy. Just to get an outside perspective and feedback from others who experience them as a person and experience their actions and behaviors and responses. And this can be a helpful tool if the client is open to utilizing it. And the seventh one I listed is narrative therapy employs written artifacts and readiness letters and certificates of achievement, which I thought was really cool. The therapist will write letters to the client after a session, discussing their progress and their strengths, and maybe some suggestions for the next therapy session. And I think this is a great way to continue to strengthen the therapeutic alliance. Next, I'm going to share with you cultural implications and limitations of narrative therapy. Narrative therapy emphasizes the meaning of social, cultural, and political contexts. I think this is super important to consider these factors because they impact everyone, and they impact everyone to different degrees, depending on ethnicity, cultural diversity, and many other factors. So it's important to explore this within the therapy session. Narrative therapy yields positive results to people of all ages. I think this is great. It can be used on children, it can be used with adolescents, adults, and also with seniors, which is very attractive to me. It promotes the growth of female clients who have experienced oppression through sexism. It promotes the growth of diverse groups who have experienced oppression, past and present. I think this is really important to explore because oppression has impacted certain groups for generations, and to different degrees as well. And it's important to explore how deeply a person has been impacted by uh, oppression and how that makes them feel, how that influences their expression and their effect and their cognitive thinking. Narrative therapy recognizes the privileges of heterosexuality. I think this is really important because I don't hear it talked about very often. Uh, Heterosexuality provides those with privilege, and it just sounds really bizarre to say out loud. It doesn't really make sense. However, it is a true mindset and it really does occur. And I think this is one that needs to be dismantled. I think narrative therapy can definitely help with that. Narrative therapy provides effective meaning making strategies to assist elderly clients. As I said earlier, yes, I'm very fond of the senior population, so I'm happy that it's really applicable to that population as well. Some limitations include utilizing narrative therapy techniques with clients who have physical or learning disabilities could present a challenge. So some of the techniques, it could be problematic for people who maybe they have a visual impairment. Some of the assignments or therapeutic techniques include like writing, journaling, expressive writing, expressive arts. And if you have a physical disability, you may not be able to uh, participate in artistic therapy, or you may not be able to do expressive writing. um, so there are some challenges here, but I think that they could be modified by speaking with the client and making sure that you can create an alternative. Acceptability of asking direct questions with some cultures could be problematic. Uh, the questioning technique of narrative therapy, it can be considered a direct type of approach. So maybe some cultures might be adverse to such direct questioning. Again, I think that could be modified once the therapy um, session dives into what the client is most comfortable with. And then you can go from there. Some narrative therapy techniques require invested time, so it's important that the therapist speaks with the client to make sure they have the time to complete these assignments. Uh, like what I mentioned, the journal writing, the expressive writing, um, expressive arts, that kind of thing. Music therapy is sometimes used as well, but it's really important that a client knows that they have time to complete these assignments, or else they might begin to feel like they're failing, which I've had that experience in therapy where I was just compiled with assignments that I wasn't capable of completing, and it didn't make me feel so good. That's so it can be difficult to read and understand narrative therapy. Narrative therapy uses a kind of language that's unique. Like they use wording to exemplify symptoms like depressing or troubling, um, and so that can sometimes be confusing to clients, the way that they use this kind of like languaging, depressing. So, and how does depressing make you feel? It's a way of externalizing the symptom, and at the same time, it can be confusing. It's narrative therapy is said to not attend to relationship patterns and structures in client families. Uh, that's a critique, and I haven't utilized it with a family, so I am not sure how true that is. And there's not much research available on measuring the efficacy of narrative therapy, so it's hard to say if it doesn't attend to relationship patterns in families. I There's not a lot of research that can tell us how effective it is, what the results are in certain populations. So that would be a further implication for research. After researching narrative therapy, I really like the components of the theory itself. I really like the techniques that are employed. I really think it's great how they implement metaphors and how they implement the double thinking, and I think it's very creative and investigative. I think that building a relationship with the client is very attractive, and I love listening to life stories. I really enjoy that. And so I think this would be a good fit for me. And here's some other reasons why I like this theory. It highlights the client's previous successes and applies the same strategy to current problems. It develops a relationship with the client, learning their life stories. As I just said, I really enjoy that. Many proponents of narrative therapy address individual and cultural diversity. I like that I can apply it to many different clients, because their stories, I really want to hear them. They must all be fascinating. Everyone has a unique story to tell. Externalizes clients' problems so it doesn't become their identity. I really like this too. It's important to not label the client, or try to help them not feel like they have been sentenced to be less than who they can actualize themselves to be. So I really like that it supports the clients to alter negative self perceptions and create a new narrative to attain their preferred outcomes. I really like the technique of the written artifacts. This is the technique that the therapists implement at the end of sessions, and they will write letters to clients and tell them what was impactful about the session, key components that they thought were significant, and list their progress and maybe some suggestions for the next session. I like this kind of communication. I think it builds a stronger alliance with the client. And narrative therapy is successfully applicable to the senior population by helping them restructure their life stories to create meaning for the client. I think when people get older, it's really hard to uh, believe that your life is meaningful because there's ageism. And the people in our peripheral often have negative stigmas and stereotypes towards age, uh, like they are damaged, they're old, they're sick, and that's really not true. And so I really like that this approach supports the senior population. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I hope that you like narrative therapy and that you might use it yourself.